Welcome to the Channel Strip, where we channel our energy into learning new things and strip away negative misconceptions. In this video, I am going to be delving into this book, which is called Tunes for Tunes by Daniel Goldmark. Now, when you watch this video, you will see that there will be one chapter per video. We will go into the sub-segments. I'm going to divide them up into two main areas. Number one being the exact idea that the writer was trying to bring forward to us. The second thing that I'm going to be doing is breaking down the chapter a little bit more and trying to delve into, because I've made notes, right? I've made notes, several pages, and we're going to try and delve into what we can take from it as composers, what ideas we can have in our mind as we write our own original music. So, the essential idea of reading the book for me is to gain the knowledge, the broad view of cartoons and classical music and how the two fit together, or just cartoons in general. And then to sort of see, what can I take from this? What can I learn from this? And how can I put this into my own music? So that's the same things that I want you guys to take from that. So that's what you get in this video. Tune in, watch the whole video, and that's what you'll be getting. Is that okay? Rightio. Don't forget to channel your energy into learning a new thing. All right. The first concept that the author, Daniel Goldmark, brings to the forefront of our minds in chapter 4 is the idea that cartoons are an excellent teaching tool, a useful medium to get a message across. He highlights the fact that a lot of Americans would have resonated with the idea that classical music would have been first brought to their attention and to their minds through cartoon music. And so he demonstrates, using multiple examples in this chapter, that cartoons are an excellent means of passing a message across, essentially an excellent teaching tool. It is important at this time to remember that visual education has a head start on other educational methods, in that we have a sympathetic audience to start with. Essentially, this quote has got me thinking about what creative people are putting out there, what writers, composers, people in the art space, what sort of content you're putting out in the general public, and essentially what message are you passing across. It's got me reflecting on the idea that we've got to really think deeply about what the consumer, the other person on the other side, is taking in, and if we are passing across educational concepts that we believe to be important. Or, for the other person on the other side, are we happy to be consuming this information? Because essentially it has been documented from, a really long time in the past that this stuff has an impact on you, So it's something to think about, guys. It's something to reflect on. Either you're consuming these things or you're putting something out there. And again, cartoons are an excellent way of passing the message across. And we'll reflect on that in a couple of quotes that we're going to read now. In a talk given at UCLA in 1944, Chuck Jones foresaw the influence of visual media on the generations of Americans growing up with films, cartoons, and eventually television. He notes, "It is important at this time to remember that visual education has a head start on other educational methods, in that we have a sympathetic audience to start with." Quotes 2. The writers often remarked on Disney's approach to the classics, their method of combining music and image, and even their dedication to children's entertainment. Disney and Stokowski, who felt very strongly that America's youth needed to be educated about classical music, took seriously the story told by each segment. Okay. Our good friend Daniel Goldmark, as he progresses in the book, he brings to our knowledge a contrary idea, which is brought forward by another author called Joseph Horowitz. Now, he sort of goes into Joseph Horowitz and his views and his beliefs. Joseph believed that the composer didn't have as much of an impact on the story, and therefore the message being sent across to the public. That's something that I personally disagree with. I think that the composer does have a big role in the final story. By music writing, you're story writing as well. You're part of that dynamic flow, and you're having a huge impact on how the message is put across. But Joseph didn't seem to think so. Now, left to me, I would say Joseph was probably biased. He was a writer. He wrote over 7 books, but his main primary area of focus was the historical institutions of classical music, and so he probably respected the art a little bit more. He probably felt that classical music was a bit sort of super advanced and not as effective as, say, the whims of a composer. One quote that stands out that downplays the impact of the composer goes as such: "It would be absurd to maintain that it could be received by the listeners as anything but entertainment." The second concept that the author brings forward in the book is one that's really sort of interesting. He sort of brings forward the idea that classical music was not well presented in cartoon music, that the art medium of cartoon music simply did not do justice to the complexity and I suppose the higher elite form of classical music. He sort of says that there's this constant juxtaposition of classical music against cartoon music, and that the two sort of hit against each other, rubbed against each other negatively, and that cartoon music just didn't do justice because it was a parody or a satire. He brings forward the idea that this was sort of brought forward by the fact that there was multiple stereotypes being played through with the cartoon music. Some of these being the fact that the singers would have been super sort of good at what they do. They would have been classically trained. There'd be a lot of training involved. They would sing super high notes. And the fact that the concert hall itself was a site of opulence and excellence, that cartoons just didn't do that justice. The fact that they'd wear attire that was very specific, and attire that was sort of elite and properly constructed, and that attire that would sort of bring forth this sort of conduct of behavior that was super, respected and well presented. And the fact that the conductor themselves would have been someone who was fearful, tyrannical, sort of to be arrogant and to be respected, and sort of rigid in their performances and their behaviors, as you well know if you've been to an opera or if you've watched any of these sort of cartoons, such as the long-haired hare where Bugs Bunny himself would have been a character in the opera house. And it's kind of suggesting that, look, the cartoon music doesn't do this well, and the writer sort of uses several examples to sort of show this forward. And I can see where he's coming from, but I would totally disagree in the sense that despite the fact that, yes, the two art mediums are maybe not well presented together, but as the writer himself says in the earlier part of the chapter, cartoon music is an excellent teaching tool. And it's one that sort of allows us to realize and to understand how powerful it has been in telling the masses about classical music and encouraging us to read about these things, encouraging us to listen to classical music. For example, I am reading this very much technical book and presenting to you guys in the video format, and you guys are watching this. Probably because you're either interested in cartoon and by extension learning about classical music, or interested in classical music and by extension learning about cartoons. So if you look at it that way, I'm thinking to myself, these two art mediums actually complement each other well, because they open the mind of the reader, the listener, the composer, the artist. It's just a really broad way of looking at different things and how they can come together to I'm essentially disagreeing, but it's still a very fundamental point in how they would have made a satire of it. So look, let's jump into a quote that further explains what the writer meant. From the moment Bugs appears in the orchestra pit here, he assumes every stereotype ever attributed to a conductor, not just Leopold Stawisky: majestic, fearful, arrogant, and tyrannical. He personifies exactly what the audience expected from a famous conductor of the time. By wearing white tie and tails, Bug acknowledges one of the most widely recognized symbols of the concert hall: the adherence to a strict code of attire and conduct that preserves the sanctity of the experience. The cartoon's audience would probably have not blinked if Bugs had led the concert in his usual state of dishabille, yet he explicitly chooses instead to adopt the culturally accepted practice. The orchestra itself offers an enormous variety of possible gags. These shorts show all the musicians on stage, typically allowing each a brief solo performance in which to demonstrate musical skill or lack thereof. Each instrument's idiosyncrasies can provoke a new throwaway gag based on its shape, colour, size, or sound, how it is played, held, fingered, or blown, and any possible similarities that might be emphasized between the appearance of the instrument and that of its player. For example, tall players on double bass, overweight men on tubas, etc., etc. Honestly, guys, there is quite a lot to unpack in that segment, in that quote, and I think the best that I can tell you at this moment in time is go see this video, watch it, I delve a little bit more into the orchestra itself, the ranges, and I sort of just share my thoughts and my approaches to orchestrating. I think you might benefit a lot from having sort of read that segment, maybe even read the whole chapter, and then watching that video might tie things together nicely. But as I said, there's a lot to unpack there, and essentially it's playing with imagery, playing with sound, and playing with location, playing with panning, equalization. It's a huge topic, and what the author even broadly suggests just sparks so much in my mind. Let me know if you guys want to hear more on that. It's definitely something that I'm interested in, and therefore would be more than happy to sort of create further content on. The author then goes on to tell us that Disney did make an attempt to sort of raise the energy and the excellence of classical music through its film Fantasia to sort of prevent the degradation of classical music. However, that was very difficult to achieve. And I encourage us all to watch that movie and sort of reflect and think about what sort of tools they're using and why this is a more focused classical music based movie, or why, if you feel like maybe it's not. So just have a listen and have a watch, and then sort of leave a comment in the description box below. The second thing then was to just mention the fact that eventually Disney sort of quote unquote gave up on classical music and sort of moved to popular pop based music in their animations. Look, it was an effort from their side, and it just didn't sort of pan through the way they wanted it to. Right, lads, that wraps up part one of the videos. Let's jump straight into the composer's corner. Welcome to the Composer's Corner. In this corner of the video, I'm going to be talking to the composers among us who want to use concepts I've read from this book to sort of make their actual writing, their scoring better. So one of the first things we're going to dive into is a tool. There's actually only two that I can take or glean from this chapter. And if you read the book, which I encourage that you do, if you find something else that's sort of something you would add into your toolbox, leave a comment below. I want to learn too from what you got from this chapter. So just to jump right in, two things that I was able to take. First one, let's just reflect on this quote right now. Gestural immediacy. When employed in short forms, such as commercials or cartoons, in which a message has only seconds to be conveyed, music must get its point across quickly. Pieces with easily identifiable motives gave film accompanists and later animators and cartoon composers a simple means of connecting a tune with a visual idea, enabling them to give a sense of completion to each gesture, at once oral and visual. Not surprisingly, most classical music were dismissed as too serious for use in other media. Okay, with this quote then, the idea of gestural immediacy. My initial thoughts is, not sure if it's something I would use myself, mostly because I am sort of wary of copyright issues and somebody saying, hey, you stole my line here or there, or somebody saying that sounds familiar and maybe you're not as clever as you think. So I would sort of refrain from it. Now, the author does kind of say, look, not every piece of classical music is particularly extractable. And not every piece you'll find a piece or a motif that you can take and use yourself. And that's fair enough. But again, I would refrain from taking other people's work, just because it also limits your creativity. Now, in a few weeks, I will be posting a new orchestral piece that I'm doing at the moment, that actually does copy a line from Stranger Things, now that I actually meant it. So maybe I'm lying here by saying I don't copy things, because I clearly have done in the past. It's good for creativity, but if you're doing any professional piece of work that you're going to get paid for, I'd probably avoid it at all costs. The second thing then that sort of comes to mind from that is the fact that, look, you can actually create your own motifs. So if you were scoring to a cartoon piece, for example, and you create a line, a melody line that sort of distinctively tells you about a character or about a particular sort of moment of joy or sadness, then you can use the gestural immediacy yourself by taking that and repeating it somewhere else, or underscoring it somewhere else, so that the listener knows, oh, I've heard that before, I'm hearing it again. That all sort of makes sense, and that's your body of work, and it's completely fine. So that's how I would use gestural immediacy, because it's my piece of work and I can just put it in, put it out, and it works that way. Now that I'm thinking about this, it's getting me very excited. So it's something that you can put into use, and I'm sure it'll make a lot of sense when you use it yourself. So that's the first piece of tool that the writer sort of plays with, that I think can be used. So let's jump into the next piece of tool, or the next tool in the toolbox of books. Ignore. Repetition and gestural immediacy is sort of denounced by another writer, Theodore Adorno, who kind of says, I don't really like this. Fundamentally speaking, this repetition, this is something that he terms plugging. Let's jump right into that quote right now. The very piece is cited by Levi and Schrupp over and over again in cartoons, but as underscore cues and as plot devices. By using the so-called light classics, a cartoon director could isolate and focus on particular musical genres one at a time. A piece that had appeared in numerous cartoons was the Second Hungarian Rhapsody. The composer Freeling says, as one of my favorite numbers, I know it and I can manipulate it. I can make it stop like a conductor. I can slow it down. That's one thing about the number. You can use a phrase and you can repeat it and it still works. A firm grasp of the ins and outs of the work enabled Freeling to tear the music apart and resemble it as he saw fit. Such an ability gave the director tremendous power, as he not only controlled the neural device visual story, but also shaped the musical narrative to suit his needs. Freeling takes a single gesture out of a larger piece, he gives it a visual image into the cartoon, and he reintegrates it as an audio-visual gag. He then sort of takes these independent gestures and sort of dissects them and uses them as motives. He repeats this several times, and he just makes good work of it. And essentially, that's what that quote was delving into. Alrighty, let's wrap this video up. The last thing that the author mentions is the concept of Adorno and how plugging is not necessarily a great thing, and I would just disagree. I think familiarity doesn't breed disrespect in music, it breeds respect. And the best way to put it forward is think about Game of Thrones intro. We love it. We love to hear it. We love to listen to it. We get excited by it. Raman Dwaji is a genius. He has found a way to bring familiarity and plugging forward into 2 seasons, right? Game of Thrones and House of the Dragons, both seasons, we see that same theme song with different characters, different themes, different melody lines, different instruments, and it does not bore us in any way, shape, or form. In fact, we love to hear it. We love how he places it. At least I do, anyway. And that's because he's good at what he does, and he understands the toolbox available to him, and he uses it well. So, a good point now to make would be to go watch my video on how to identify the ranges of orchestras, because with that video and this video, you put those 2 things together, you're going to be really good at this. You're going to understand how to get this right and not wrong. And I think that's why we can learn from this guy, because he's kind of saying, look, it can actually be really boring if you repeat 7 sections again and again and again back to front, in the same piece of work. So don't do that. Make your music remarkable, make it variable, make it dynamic, make it different. So to use canon-like principles to score, and you'll do very well with the plugin and the sort of gestural immediacy. You'll do very well with these kind of tools. And the repetition, it works if placed properly. It doesn't work when not placed properly and not sort of done rightly. So, I suppose I would disagree, One of the books that I've read of recent sort of says that, if you can get your reader to watch something without getting distracted, and you can keep them involved and not observed in the film itself, you've done a fantastic job, because a lot of the things that we want to do is make the music and the film sort of sit so tightly together that they sound like they were made to be. That piano line sounds like it was always there. That you didn't necessarily compose it. It was just they came together. That's how you want your music to sound, not distracting to the listener. Now, of course, sometimes you want to have a dramatic effect on what you do, but for the vast majority, even if it's dramatic, you want to sing dramatic at the right time, so much so that it fits perfectly with what's on screen. So I don't know, personally, I would definitely use it as a tool. It's something that I do use, something that I intend on using in the future. It's done really well. I mean, if I can compose like Raman Dwaji, I'm winning in life, and he does that, so I am totally going to do that. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, those are just my thoughts. It's a great book. I recommend you all read it, read chapter 4, think about what you've gotten from it, and drop a comment in the comment section below and let me know what you're thinking. There is a total of 5 chapters in this book, I'm pretty sure. Yep. So you can expect at least 4 more videos from me, one every month, hopefully, over the next couple of months. So do like and subscribe, but particularly subscribe so you can see those videos when they drop. You don't have to go searching for them, because there's a lot to unpack in this book. It's a great book. So with that, friends and family, well, not friends and family, with that, strippers, I let you guys go. Thank you for joining me. I hope you've been challenged. I hope you've learned something new. And I hope you've stripped away all those negative misconceptions. Super duper stuff. I will see you guys in the next video.